What's going on YouTube? Super Insane 18 here, and this is a brand new series that I am going to be calling Side Decking 101. This is going to be where I teach you how to side deck depending on what deck you are playing. This time it is going to be for Drytron, but if this does well, I will make this a continued series where I go over all of the top decks for whatever format we are in at the time of making these videos. So let's go ahead and jump on in. So let's kick things off by doing a super quick overview of what's in the side deck, and then we'll go more into why it's in the side deck during our next section. But do note that this is a side deck specifically for my variant of Drytron. I will put my list up on the screen now if you didn't see my Drytron deck profile. This is what I consider to be the best way to play Drytron, and thus my side deck is catered for this build. If your build is different, it might change slightly what you side in and out, but just as a general rule of thumb, this is what I believe is absolutely correct for siding when you play Drytron. We have 3 Droll and Lockbird, 2 Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion, 2 Artifact Lancia, 3 Denko Sekka, 1 Necroworld Banshee, 1 Zombie World, 1 Harpy's Feather Duster, and 2 Twin Twisters. Starting with Droll, not only does every meta deck right now either draw or add cards to their hand multiple times in a turn, but Droll is also the absolute only hand trap that just flat out stops Drytron. And with Drytron being the best deck of this format, this card's absolutely mandatory in any side deck if you're not already maining it. Other than Drytron, it's very hard to gauge what you'd side this in against, especially since the first ones that come to mind are Invoke Shaddoll and Sky Striker. But both of those matchups have much more important cards to side in, so for now I'd consider Droll specifically for the opposing Drytron match. But you do kind of have to have a little bit of just thought going into it. If there's nothing else that you want to side against some other matchups and Droll does hurt the deck, definitely consider putting it in. Ghost Bell is a combination prevention and protection card. It's great to prevent your opponent from playing cards like the Drytron monster's activated effects in the graveyard, Tri-Brigade Revolt, Invocation, and Shaddoll Schism. Aside from just siding it in against those specific decks though, you should also side it in if you know or even suspect that your opponent's going to side in cards such as Ally of Justice Cycle Reader or DD Crow against you. Both of these cards are massive threats for Drytron, so you want to be able to stop them if you can. Between having cards like Call by the Grave and the Millenniumize Restrict, Ghost Bell just adds that extra bit of protection that you might need. Lancia is mostly, again, just for one specific matchup, that matchup being Tri-Brigade, as it is the next top contender aside from Drytron, turning off their ability to banish all but ends their turn, similarly to how Droll would just end the turn of Drytron, but it can also serve as utility against other relevant or even rogue decks, Shaddoll Invoked and Eldritch to name a few. Denko Sekka is an absolutely phenomenal card, specifically because when you're playing Drytron, the only other normal summon that the deck plays is Diviner of Heralds. And if you haven't seen the top 5 best meta decks of July 2021 video that I put out, definitely check it out. It will show you that the 4 decks on the list that are not Drytron all revolve very heavily around some form of backrow based strategy. Something as simple as normal summoning Denko against any of these decks can often flat out win you the game. They can't respond with any of their back row unless it's a card to negate Denko's summon, and once Denko hits the field, everything that they have set just becomes useless. Denko should absolutely go in against decks like Tri-Brigade, Sky Striker, Shaddoll, Salamangrate, Eldritch, and honestly anything that you see that ends up relying very heavily on a back row based strategy. Now let's talk about Necroworld Banshee and Zombie World at the same time. They might as well be the same card because you're never going to side one in without the other. At this point in the format, it's really just for Tri-Brigades as well, but before the list hit, it was phenomenal against Dragon Link, so if that does manage to resurface, definitely consider it. But I don't think that that deck is really a threat anymore after the hits that it received on the most recent ban list. Regardless of that fact though, it is definitely very good against Tri-Brigade. That solidifies its spot in the side deck for me. Turning all of your opponent's monsters into zombies means that they're unable to use the Tri-Brigade effects to special summon Link monsters from their extra deck, and it even turns off their ability to use Revolt because Revolt does specifically need to summon any of the Tri-Beast types. It can be noted that Zombie World even somewhat hinders Drytron as well, because Meteona's Drytron does need to send machine monsters from the field. So if they're zombies, they're not machines, obviously. You can kind of get around this by using the material from Mu Beta. So it really doesn't hurt Drytron all that much, but it does in kind of a roundabout way. I probably personally wouldn't side it in against Drytron, but just a little bit of an honorable mention for you guys. And then rounding off this section, we have Harpy's Feather Duster and Twin Twisters, which we will talk about together because they both serve the same purpose. 4 out of the 5 top decks revolve around back row, as we've already stated, and I think that we've reached a format where Eldritch isn't enough of a threat to warrant Cosmic Cyclone over Twin Twisters. I'd much rather hit as many face downs as possible and allow them to hit the grave, rather than just making a 1-for-1 trade that only gives me the benefit of banishing the card instead. Pretty much the same as Denko, you would side these in against Tri-Brigade, Sky Striker, Shadal, Salamangrate, Eldritch, and anything else that relies on back row as its main strategy. Our next section is the first cards out section, and this section should be taken with a grain of salt, as these are cards that I just personally feel are the most expendable in the deck. From left to right, we have the absolute first cards that I generically take out in a vacuum situation, to the cards that I take out if I just really need to take something out, and honestly, I'd probably rather leave these in if possible, but they do have to come out if there's not enough space. Drytron Fafnir loses hard to Droll. Game 1 I wanted in for the consistency, but Game 2 and 3 I'd rather not lose to my opponent's side deck, and a lot of people are siding Droll. So the spot in this deck just can be utilized much better as almost anything else from the side deck. So definitely the first card that you want to take out more often than not. Eva is the next card, as it's easily swapped out because you run 2 copies. Running 2 is great on turn 1 because it allows you to fish for more negates, but realistically that's just a win more strategy. Being able to set up a full board on just 2 cards leaves 3 other cards in your hand, of which they can be potential fairies, adding to your negate counter anyway, so turning your second Eva into a card better suited for the matchup just makes sense. Foolish Burial realistically is just an additional copy of any Drytron name. You can accomplish the same results with Mu Beta, and that doesn't require you to hard draw a one of, so Foolish can take a backseat for some of the more important side deck strategies. Honestly, it's like I said, you can just accomplish the exact same thing with an extra deck monster, so who needs this in the main? It's their game 1 for consistency only, so go ahead and drop this if you need to. The exact same thing can be said about Gamma. It is a 2 of in the main, so dropping it to 1 is more than doable. Mu Beta gives you access to it fairly easily, so it's just something that isn't hard to take out. Cyber Angel Natasha is a tough one. It is a great card, don't get me wrong, but I just feel like it's not as good as it used to be with less Ben-10s. Yeah, you have your Ida 10 in your deck, so your Cyber Angel count is really only 1 less from what it used to be before the ban list, but in several tournaments that I've played and the many hours of playtesting that I've done with this deck, Natasha just doesn't feel as good as it once did. It's really cool in Game 3 with its ability to gain you life points in a timed scenario, but overall it's probably still better as something from your side deck if we're being honest. Let's group Instant Fusion and Call by the Grave into one category because as far as this deck is concerned, they basically do the exact same thing. I really only ever side these out if I'm going second. The ability to stop hand traps is phenomenal, but in my opinion is just not as important games 2 and 3 if you know you're going to be going second. I'd much rather worry about breaking and shutting down a board than I would being hand trapped. They're low on this list because they're mostly a last resort side out if I need the room, but it's still something worth considering. And finishing up this section, we have Meteonis Drytron. This is another 2 of that you can definitely only have 1 copy of in your deck if need be. It's recurable, so 1 is technically all that's necessary. The only reason it's last on this list is because removing it does remove some of the grind aspect that this deck needs in game 2 and 3, but if you need the space, you need the space, and it's gotta go. You do have the 1 of, and it's very searchable, so it's really all that you need. It just doesn't really help with the grind game. Now, here we have some direct swaps, just to make things a little easier. Knowing what comes out for what removes any need to overthink what your game plan is. So let's start with Necroworld Banshee and Zombie World. These are direct swaps for Eva and Drytron Fafnir respectively. Your second Eva is always going to be used as Beatrice fodder on your opponent's standby, and you've already used the first Eva on your turn to establish some form of negates anyway, so instead of establishing more negates, you're going to establish a Banshee on your opponent's standby. The field spell for field spell is also just easy, especially since Fafnir is the first card to always come out. In a match where the strategy is needed, you can easily interchange these 2 cards without having to put too much thought into it. And finally, we have Harpy's Feather Duster and Twin Twisters. These are actually more often than not going to be swapped with a card that isn't on our first out list, and that card is Forbidden Droplet. Forbidden Droplet isn't on the first out list because it's without a doubt one of the best cards in the game right now. But after discussing the side deck with several other people, as well as just the testing and tournaments that I've played, I've pretty much come to the conclusion that most decks worth siding Harpy's Feather Duster and Twisters against don't need droplets to stop. Obviously, there can and probably will be exceptions to that mindset, but just as a general rule of thumb, it tends to work. There is one honorable mention, and that is Mystic Mine. I absolutely hate this card with a fiery passion, but it does have some interesting strengths in Drytron. Being a deck that plays little to no back row, almost no one is going to side in any sort of back row hate against this deck, And if they main back row hate, then they're probably going to take it out for better cards. Mystic Mine can let you turn off an already established board and allow you to either just play the waiting game gathering resources until you can game your opponent, or flat out just nuke an already established board with Zeus fairly easily. So there you guys have it. I think that side decking is the most important aspect of playing competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! It is a very hard thing to do, knowing what to take out, when to take it out, and hopefully this can help you guys. Even if it gives you just that little bit of edge up on your opponent, then I'll consider it a success. If you liked and would like to see more of these, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, share with your friends, and I will see you guys next time.